Welcome to our YouTube video series on business law. My name is Christopher Neufeld of Neufeld Legal, and in this particular video we'll be discussing the limitations of sole proprietorships. Now, whereas sole proprietorships may be adequate for certain businesses, namely small businesses and startup businesses, the very limitations that we're going to be discussing about and other aspects over time can even put those businesses in need of moving beyond a sole proprietorship. But what is it that really limits sole proprietorships, and what are the reasons for not engaging or continuing as a sole proprietorship? Well, the first reason is the limitation in its size. There's only one owner. You cannot have anybody as a co-owner, a co-partner in the business, because then it becomes a partnership, and as such loses its characteristics as a sole proprietorship and transforms into something else with its own set of rules, obligations, and considerations, as well as limitations. So you have to maintain sole ownership. Yes, you can employ people, you can contract other people, but you cannot have a co-owner or a co-partner, because at that point you are no longer a sole proprietorship. Next, and most glaring, is the aspect of unlimited liability. The fact of the matter is, a sole proprietorship is an extension of the person, and as such all the liability necessarily flows unto its owner in their personal capacity, making all their personal assets vulnerable, because there is really no distinction other than the name between the business of the sole proprietorship and the individual that's owning and operating the business. A very serious concern that is addressed oftentimes with incorporation, recognizing the limitations also associated with liability on the incorporation side. The aspect of capital and financing and the limitations imposed thereon, because as a sole proprietorship you are really limited to taking on financing as any other person would take on debt. People do not necessarily invest in other people. They do not take equity in other people. And as such, there are serious constraints and limitations with respect to taking on significant financing and capital infusions, especially when you go beyond the traditional financing arrangements of offering money and providing a debt note. How does one provide equity or other forms of investment in an individual and have control over that situation beyond taking security? A very serious consideration, and one that is more aptly designed for a corporation or even a partnership. And this even leads to perception, because perception as to the growth pattern, the ability to take on further investors, the ability to expand out, is not perceived within a sole proprietorship. That is more of the view of a corporation or a partnership. And hence we get to another aspect, that of a lack of continuity. For when the business is merely an individual, that individual can really only transfer the assets that they own and impart the knowledge that they have unto someone else. Whereas in other business structures, namely a corporation and a partnership, the intent is to design the structure so that there is, if not a legal entity separate and apart from the individual, at least a repository of individuals who can assume the role of the departed individual. Thanks. The key often comes down to a point we raised previously, and that is perception. One's perception as a sole proprietorship relative to that of a partnership or a corporation can be significant when dealing with external parties. Oftentimes, it is the mere perception, the aura that one creates by having a corporation that does make a difference. It is for employees, they are being employed by a corporation, not by an individual. There is a perspective of growth and development that comes with corporations and partnerships that is not necessarily seen and viewed with a sole proprietorship. And even in many business arrangements, the lack of a corporate structure, a partnership structure, is a detriment to successfully concluding deals. There's often an expectation that those structures are in place. Otherwise, the person is not knowledgeable as to business and what is being sought to be achieved through the business. And hence the importance associated with having a structure that appeals, even from the perspective of others, to their innate business sense, irrespective of how inaccurate it might be. This is critical, and it ties into all the other technical aspects. Thank you.